Hello and welcome back, everyone. So tonight I want to continue with our second lesson of academic writing and research. To my students in Ethiopia, you have these materials. They are in the Google Classroom, so you can access them there. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the role of rhetoric and rhetorical patterns that we find in academic writing, in paragraphs, in essays, and in larger works like our thesis or our dissertation. We're going to talk about how argumentative structure can change. We're going to talk about cohesion and flow in our paragraphs. We're going to see lots of examples of transitional words and phrases. And we're going to talk a little bit about sentence structure and punctuation when we talk about parallelism. So when we think about rhetoric, what do you think of? You might think of ancient Greek philosophers, but rhetoric is really the art of persuasion. And when we write, we see this approach in the rhetorical devices that writers choose. So, depending on the discipline that you're writing in, you may approach your argument differently. So, we've got several different examples here. In psychology, we want to use structured arguments to justify our findings in our research articles. If we're writing in the business world, we want to write proposals with persuasive language because we're writing for our stakeholders, perhaps shareholders or investors or board members, and we want to convince them of the merit of the proposal that we're putting forward. Legal writing is especially structured. We want to cite prior legal precedents. In engineering or other STEM fields, we're going to try to write clearly and concisely, and we're going to reference specific language in that field. But regardless of the discipline that we're writing in, we want to make sure that we've got a clear argument, it's logically organized, and it's supported with the appropriate evidence. It's evidence-based. So in our writing, in our paragraphs, we've got a logical sequence of ideas, right? A sentence is a complete thought at the most basic level, and a paragraph is a collection of sentences that expresses an idea, right? So we've got our topic sentence, we've got evidence in support of our topic sentence, and we've got a conclusion. And as we're going to see in a moment, if we're writing one paragraph that's standing alone, that conclusion is probably a final thought that restates the main idea. If, on the other hand, we've got a collection of paragraphs, as we do in an essay, then we're going to transition to that next idea. In an essay, we've got a thesis-driven argument. We've got transitions, transition words and phrases, as well as transition sentences that move us between our big points. And our dissertation or our thesis is far more complex. We'll have paragraphs that will transition us from different sections or chapters of our paper. But a dissertation is a far more complex structure because we're going to be analyzing and presenting research with a variety of viewpoints, and we're going to be synthesizing that. So let's take a look at structure, presentation, and how they impact academic argument. So I'm going to move to the color-coded version of this paragraph here. And this is all about online education. And right away in red, we've got a really strong topic sentence. It says, online education provides students with the flexibility to balance their studies with personal and professional responsibilities. So, one of my students tonight said, oh, this is our thesis statement. And you know what? I like that because when we're talking about writing at the paragraph level, what we've really got is a topic sentence, which is the thesis for that paragraph, right? Our thesis is what we're arguing. And in a paragraph, our first sentence or our topic sentence is telling the main idea. It's what we're going to be presenting in that paragraph. And that's exactly what that is. Online education provides students with the flexibility to balance their studies with personal and professional responsibilities. Then as we go through in blue here, we've got tons of supporting details. And we can see it's evidence-based according to Smith. They're citing the research. They've got statistics here. 70% of students prefer online education due to its adaptability. As we look here in green, we've got these transition words. Additionally, moreover, since, thus. Those are all words that improve the cohesion of that paragraph. And finally, in yellow, we've got a concluding thought. The flexibility of online education not only enhances accessibility, but also helps students develop critical skills for success. So they're leaving the reader with a strong concluding thought. If we were writing this paragraph as part of an essay, we would transition to our next point. So looking back at those rhetorical features that we just went over, our topic sentence is going to introduce the main idea of the paragraph. Our supporting details are going to give evidence, examples, and explanations, and these should further develop the main idea of that paragraph. Our transitions help to improve the logical flow and the cohesion of that paragraph. And then finally, we've got our concluding sentence. And as I said, we're either going to summarize the main point, leave the reader with a strong thought, or we're going to transition to that next big idea, which is the next paragraph. So when we think about the features of a good paragraph, and then we think about the features of a good essay, they're really similar. What we're doing with an essay is we're essentially taking that paragraph and we're pulling it apart and we're expanding it. So that's really what it is. It's expanding that paragraph into an essay. Instead of a sentence, now we've got a paragraph that represents something. So let's take a look here at exactly what that looks like. So here I've got an essay on global warming, and I'll let you pause this and read it on your own, but I want to take a look specifically here at the introduction. Global warming poses a severe threat to island communities. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and damage to marine ecosystems are among the most pressing issues caused by climate change. If left unaddressed, these challenges will lead to irreversible consequences for the island of Palmyra. Therefore, immediate action is necessary to protect Palmyra's people, natural resources, and future generations. So when I look at that introduction there, that first sentence, global warming poses a severe threat to island communities. That's a very strong statement, right? In our first sentence, we want to bring that reader in. We want to engage them. Now, when we're writing academic texts, we want to be mindful of how we do this, right? We don't want to use exclamations. We don't want to pose rhetorical questions because we do want to adhere to the conventions of academic writing, which we said in our last lesson. Academic writing is formal, so we want to make sure that we're doing that. When we look at the green here, rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and damage to marine ecosystems. These are the three big points that this author is going to discuss throughout the essay. That's our thesis map. I often think of it like a roadmap. It tells me where I'm going, right? When I read that, I say, okay, this is what he's going to talk about or she's going to talk about. And then the author is saying immediate action is necessary to protect Palmyra's people, natural resources, and future generations. So that's what they want. That's what they're arguing, right? That's their thesis. That's the big idea here. They're supporting that with the evidence they're going to present about rising sea levels, extreme weather, and damage to marine ecosystems. So as we go here to our body, we see in yellow the topic sentences. They match what we see here in green, right? So there's that relationship between the topic sentences in the body paragraphs and the thesis map in the introduction. In blue, we've got these transition words and phrases in addition to rising sea levels. Furthermore, and then in pink here, we've got our supporting details. And we can see the author cites evidence, lots of statistics, very, very well argued. As we move into our conclusion here, we can see that the author signposts or signals the end of their essay by saying in conclusion. Then the author restates that thesis right there. They said the future of Palmyra depends on the urgent and collective efforts of its citizens. And that's tied up here where he says these three big ideas here threaten the island's way of life, but there's still time to act. That's tied right there to our thesis statement up here. And then in green, we've got our three main points. There's rising sea levels, extreme weather, and ecosystem destruction. And we see all of that up here in each of these three paragraphs. And we also see it mentioned here up there in our introduction. So all of those things tie together. Finally, the author leaves us with a strong concluding thought saying, protecting Palmyra from the devastating effects of global warming is not just a choice, it's a necessity. The time for action is now. Now, I want to look at this text here in purple because what we've got here is a persuasive essay. Now, persuasive essays are about you, the audience. When I'm writing an opinion essay is about me. I'm the writer. I want to share my opinion. I want you to think my opinion's valid. But when I'm writing a persuasive essay, I really need you to do something here. So I've got to call you to act. I've got to tell you exactly what it is that I want you to do. And that call to action has to be specific and it's got to be timely. So when I look there in purple, the author says residents must support policies that limit carbon emissions, promote renewable energy, and invest in climate adaptation measures. So the author's being very clear as to what they want their audience to do. So that is the call to action in this essay. So when we go to this next essay here, I'm going to allow you to pause the video and read through this. This is all about online learning. Now, this is not as much of a persuasive essay as it is an opinion essay. So hopefully you've paused the video and you've had a chance to read through this. As we look at the introduction here, okay, we can see that we've got our hook. Online learning has revolutionized higher education. Revolutionized is a very strong word. I'm engaged. I want to know, how has it revolutionized higher education? The author does mention traditional classrooms as being valuable, but he outlines some of the challenges that they present. He says online education allows students to learn at their own pace, expands access to education, and develops students' digital skills. So, flexibility, learning at your own pace, expanding access to education, expands overall access to education, and develop essential digital skills. And here, develop students' digital skills. So right there, that's my thesis map. That's where the author is telling me the three big points that they're going to be discussing. And finally, I have got my thesis statement here, which is, in doing so, online learning is shaping the future of higher education. Now, if I go back down here to my conclusion, is transforming higher education. I've got that thesis statement right there, and I've got it restated in my conclusion. I might change this word. Instead of shaping, I might say reshaping. Transforming is changing, so I might say reshaping. As I go through each of my body paragraphs, I've got my topic sentences here. Okay, and I'm actually gonna move this here. And the reason I'm going to do that is because this author has chosen to use Transition phrases, another key benefit, and beyond accessibility and flexibility. So the author is transitioning between those big points. In addition to those key phrases, I might use in an essay sentences to transition between paragraphs. So here, the author is saying this helps make education accessible to the masses. And then I might say um, beyond accessibility, but that's not the only benefit, you could say. And now I know the next paragraph is going to tell me about a subsequent benefit. So that's another strategy that writers can use. They can use a transition sentence to bind those paragraphs together. Then I've got my signposting, but my conclusion. In conclusion, it's transforming higher education. And I've got my three big ideas: flexibility, expanding access, and developing digital skills. So, during my class tonight, when I was teaching this, one of my students said, is this really a call to action? It's, if it is, it's a little weak. They're asking the audience to embrace online learning. So, one thing I would encourage you to do is if you are writing a persuasive piece, whether it's an editorial for the newspaper where you're trying to shape public policy, or you're simply writing a persuasive essay for your professor, think about where you want to go before you begin writing. What is it that you want your audience to do? And then shape your argument accordingly, because it's your argument that hopefully will have persuaded your audience to take the action you want them to take. But be specific. What exactly do you want them to do? And it has to be time bound as well. When do you want them to do it? So here it says embrace online learning. That could mean anything. That could mean watching a YouTube video. It could mean taking an online course. It could mean someone in my class tonight said asking your policymakers to develop a community center where students have access to online learning. So we've got a wide variety of what embracing online learning could be. And we don't want to leave that open to interpretation for our audience. We want to tell them exactly what it is that we want them to do. So we want to be specific, and we want to make sure whatever it is that we want them to do, it's time bound. And that can be as simple as saying, immediately, do it immediately. But we want to make sure that we give a clear indication to our audience where that's concerned. Okay, so talking about language and flow in writing, we've got two examples here. The first example says, climate change is a problem. Some researchers argue that emissions cause warming, while others disagree. Government should take action. Okay, first of all, we got a lot of short, choppy sentences here. The author is not really using academic language. They're certainly not using precise language. And I've got what looks to be a call to action here at the end. Government should take action. But again, what action, right? Just like we said earlier, what does it mean to embrace online learning? What action do you want me to take, right? So, I mean, that could mean a variety of different things. Maybe government should mandate that everyone drives electric cars. Maybe governments should reduce emissions targets, right? We don't know. When we look at that revised version, we see the author uses much more precise language. They say climate change is an urgent issue requiring immediate attention. Research shows that carbon emissions significantly contribute to global warming. They cite Smith. Despite some debate, so they're acknowledging that others are against this, the scientific consensus supports intervention. So right there, this is evidence-based. Therefore, governments must implement policies to reduce emissions and mitigate long-term consequences. So they're far more specific in their call to action. If I was redoing this, I might be even more specific. Reduce emissions. Well, how much? How much do you want the government to reduce emissions? I might set a clear target. Governments must reduce emissions by X percent, or they must reduce emissions in line with the Paris Climate Accords, right? Something along those lines. Okay, so when you are writing, remember, you want to make sure that your thesis is clear and direct. We don't want to be too general. Just like with a call to action, we want to be very specific. Evidence. Anytime you're citing evidence, you take your writing and you move it from this is my opinion to this is why my opinion matters, right? You're creating validity for what it is that you write. So what types of evidence can strengthen your argument? Well, statistics. You want to cite reputable sources. All of those things can strengthen your argument. Don't cite Wikipedia. Um, you want to cite research from peer-reviewed journal articles. Counter arguments and objectivity. So I think it's really important, particularly when we are writing a persuasive piece, that we acknowledge opposing views, right? We want to acknowledge opposing views because it shows our audience that, number one, we're aware of them, right? If we fail to mention counter arguments, your audience may be reading your piece and thinking, does this person even know about this argument? So when you mention that counter argument, you show your audience, yes, I am aware of that, but this is why it's wrong, right? So you want to mention that counter argument and then you want to refute it. And like we saw in that last excerpt that we developed into a more refined version, we want to use precise language. Okay, so really quick on Skills Lab today, we're going to talk about parallelism in writing. So, when we talk about parallel lines, we're talking about two lines that run directly side by side and they never touch, right? They go on forever and they never touch. Okay, so here I've got this first sentence. It says, the study aimed to analyze data, testing a hypothesis, and the development of a model. Now, this is not a parallel structure because these three verb tenses, analyze, testing, and the development, okay, we're all over the place here. Okay, let's go to this second example. The study aimed to analyze data, test a hypothesis, and develop a model. So we've got three instances of the bare infinitive, analyze, test, and develop. Perfect, right? So here I've got this sentence. The professor emphasized reading critically to write clearly and effective communication. I could say the professor emphasized reading critically, writing clearly, and communicating effectively. So there you've got three parallel structures. So for your homework to apply what we've learned in tonight's class, you can write a short paragraph talking about the significance of your research. You may have already done this if you've already written your chapter 1. If you haven't drafted your chapter 1, this is a great opportunity to get some practice because you're going to have to do this. So draft maybe 5 or 6 sentences in a short paragraph talking about why your study is significant. And if you want to, you can use this graphic organizer to help you. Okay, think about what your research is about, give some context, why it's important. You might choose to mention opposing views or why it's a particularly controversial topic, if it is. What supports your claim, and finally, a concluding sentence. Okay, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I'll see you in our next lesson.